had to do some things at the college there, but that's understandable. And we're going to have a special guest today, Dr. Vincent Bocate of Wheaton College, professor of theology, director and Center for Applied Christian Ethics. Now, I'm just going to throw up something really fast here. This is my commercial for today. My only commercial. It's a. If you need this organ, this is a good organ. Wurlitzer 4100. I have it here. You can have it. It's yours for Christmas, play carols, etc. It's a heavy beast, but it's beautiful. It works. Wurlitzer 4100. Give me an email at john@xpn.news. So that's had to get that out of the way. So we're going to welcome Dr. Bocate here with us, and Bocate with us, and he's a beautiful man. And so let's give up. We're going to put out the welcome mat, and here he comes. There's the doctor. Hello.
How you doing? Good.
Good to see you. And I discussed just a little before we went on air here that maybe it's been a year or so since we've had a little conversation. So I'm glad we could get together. I'm going to show, I want to put myself down here in a second. We're going to show a couple of his books that he's got out there that you can go to Amazon and get. I'm going to put myself down here in a minute.
You didn't put my expensive book up there.
Oh, one of those deep books. Okay. Oh, I gotta get you back up. I did this all wrong here.
Four books for the price of one.
Oh, you got another book?
Yeah, this one.
Oh, you know what? I was going to copy that one, but I didn't know much about it. But
yeah. Well,
that's four of those other books about.
Well, this is the book that, because it's a Brill publication, the B and the BRP, Brill Research Perspectives, they sell to libraries, and so if you want to buy one book for the price of four, that's your book. But there is a article length version of the book in Comment Magazine, actually, called I think In Search of a Good News Christianity.
Good.
Yeah.
Now, I read your book earlier a few years ago, The Political Disciple, and then you have this other book. I didn't know much about Abraham Kuyper. Yeah.
Yes.
I didn't know much about him, but it sounded very interesting. So you got a book about him too, right?
Yes. Yeah, that's my first book. Yes.
I think about it. I knew somebody.
He was great and also greatly flawed. But
that sounds like me. Okay, go on.
But he's how I became a critical thinker, because I loved what he had to say about public engagement.
Right.
I was put into a crisis by what he said about race, or particularly about those of African descent and race. And I had to do the internal work of thinking about how do you navigate a person who plays a lot of the music you like and then plays some songs you really despise. And I think what I concluded was that the songs I like did not require playing the songs that I despised.
Okay.
And so it was hard, though. It was a real crisis, because I was worried about being criticized for making him my dissertation figure, and for becoming an expert in this guy. And now what I say is, look, pick your person beside Jesus on whom you become an expert, and they may not have things that are quite as offensive as Kuyper, but the longer you hang around with them, the closer you get to finding out things that are really disappointing and unsettling, at least because of what they failed to say or do, at most because of what they say or do.
I read a short, I think it was Wikipedia this afternoon on him, and I go,
but he was really remarkable person.
I know who he reminds me of. William Jennings Bryan.
Oh, interesting.
Because Bryan, was in the Presbyterian Church.
Mm-hmm.
He later was moderator of the Presbyterian Church,
Mm.
and he ran 3 times for president. Of course, we know he wasn't president.
Right.
And then his wife, they were out in Omaha. His wife was the first female attorney in Omaha, in Nebraska. And he had 3 amendments that he was for, and they all passed. Like, it was for the graduated income tax.
Oh, he was very
And then I think the prohibition,
mm-hmm.
and he was for women's suffrage.
Yeah. Yeah.
So he was pretty progressive in a lot of ways. And then he got that old Scopes trial, made him all look like, something else.
Well, H.L. Mencken didn't like religion to begin with, right? So he definitely made Brian look like an idiot.
And right.
And Clarence Darrow did as well, I guess, by putting him on the stand. And then, and of course, Brian died before the trial was over.
Yeah, and he had one of the first vaccinations for diabetes.
Mm.
He had insulin.
Mm.
He had diabetes too.
Well,
anyway, he's one of my favorite politicians.
Yeah.
Went down to his hometown. I think it's Salem, Illinois.
Oh, really? Oh, interesting.
I think so. Yeah.
Oh, fascinating.
Anyway, he's from Illinois.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, 3 times, but that you can run more than once. Well, here's some of the topics we might talk about: critical race theory, woke or wokeness, and maybe Jonathan Blanchard. I thought we might hit on him a little, but that critical race theory comes up every so often, and it's in the news about every other, especially with the school situations. It seems like.
Right.
And it's not necessarily at the university level. It's at, like, we're teaching this at high school level. I believe that's what they'll get.
And there are people who at some colleges, they're worried about it as well. I think the problem is that, one, most people don't know what it is. 2, it's a catch-all for some ways that people are trying to talk about how race has operated in the structure of the modern world in general, and the United States in particular. And there are people who think that it means if you're going to talk about race, then are you making white kids feel bad for being white?
Right.
And does critical race theory, demand that you do this? And the answer really is no. But I think what may happen in some cases, probably not in most places at all, but in some cases, somebody may read, say, Robin DiAngelo's book, White Fragility, or maybe Ibram X. Kendi's book, How to Be an Anti-Racist. Neither of them, by the way, are critical race theorists, although they may be in some ways informed by it. But let's say you get, an elementary school teacher that reads it and says to their 6th grade class, we talk about justice in the United States. We really need to understand how we need to do better about justice. And part of the way that we've been problematic on justice is not understanding how whiteness functions or something, right? Or understanding the privilege that comes with being white, etc. Well, so then some kid goes home, and it seemed like the teacher said that I should feel guilty for being white.
Okay.
And then you get all these dominoes. And the point isn't that there may not be people who are doing bad versions of critical race theory in some places. It's the idea that there are intentional curricular strategies in throughout elementary schools, right, that are actively about making people feel bad for being white or something, and also giving people in some cases narratives about the history of the United States that make race the main reason for everything. And again, you may get somebody that does a reductionistic thing like that, but the fact is that, what I always think in terms of these parents showing up at these meetings is like, well, why don't you just talk to your kid's teacher and find out what they're actually teaching, instead of showing up, demanding that none of this stuff gets taught in our schools. Well, what exactly is being taught, as opposed to some pundit and somebody who is making their sort of social media presence get larger by creating this issue, um, by getting people to think that this is everywhere. I mean, part of it, and part of what happened, I think, the reason people even know anything about it is ways that people responded to Kendi's book and to D'Angelo's book. The fact that there's a guy who worked for the Manhattan Institute who, got the attention of Trump. And I think Trump was looking for an issue to try to tell people about something that's really terrible, what's happening.
Okay.
And so this guy, I think Charles Rufo is his name, is talking about, the problem with critical race theory. And so Trump is like announcing this, and the terrible critical race theory that's happening, in our schools. Well, I mean, that doesn't mean that Trump actually did the research for that, right? It's just that this guy is saying that it's something to be nervous about.
Right.
And then I think another big thing that happened was in the Southern Baptist Convention a couple of years ago, there was they do these things called resolution, and there was a resolution number 9 a couple of years ago, I think 2019 at the Southern Baptist Convention, and it was a resolution that talked about the use of critical race theory as a tool for helping describe how race has worked, all the while being under Scripture, and Scripture being the ultimate authority. Well, there were some people who really didn't like that at all, because they thought that was getting in the way of the gospel, et cetera, et cetera. And that it's divisive because you're pointing out differences between people rather than our unity in Christ, et cetera. And there's a big sort of stink in the Southern Baptist Convention about that. And then about a year ago, just over a year ago, because I think it was November of 2019, I'm sorry, 2020, you had the 6th Southern Baptist Convention president signing a document talking about opposing the teaching of critical race theory as a worldview. And
well, I think some Baptists quit then, didn't they?
They did, but although Charlie Dates and Ralph West, neither of them were people who were mainly Southern Baptists. They had affiliate relations.
They had double affiliations.
Yeah, and they walked away from that. And there are probably some people that left for sure. But there are a lot of people that didn't leave, So, but some people did. And the point though is that all of these things are giving attention to critical race theory. And the thing is that critical race theory, in terms of the name itself, as this conversation that goes back at least to the 1970s in legal studies, very arcane, difficult stuff to read in legal studies. The name critical race theory is given to it in 1989. And point being is that it's around 20 years, that name, before you get, this resolution 9. And I think it just becomes another reason for people to get nervous about ways of talking about systemic racism, etc. Now, I do think the other side of it is to say that there are probably some people who have read some aspect of critical race theory, or maybe they've read more of it, but they've done it because in their church settings they've been getting no traction in terms of getting people to actually address the question of race seriously, and particularly addressing the question of race seriously beyond being simply a matter of personal prejudice. And so critical race theory is one of the tools that they would use to help describe how race has worked in our modern world. Particularly it's focusing initially through the legal system. And then so you may get some people that they're like, look, this is helping you understand how all this stuff has worked. And so what happens then is that maybe there's some people that have been wanting to say, no, we need to talk about this, and here's what's helping us talk about it. And then people don't understand, why are you talking about this, and why aren't we using the Bible, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And you get maybe some people that have done bad versions of talking about critical race theory, but then you get this notion that, look at all these people talking about critical race theory, and this is terrible, and it's getting in the way of us being unified people, and
Okay.
it seems to be a strategy, etc. So I think that the irony is that you basically have made something that was kind of in an obscure domain of legal studies. You've actually given it a great public relations campaign by all the opposition.
So you would say basically it was just out there, but then
It had been,
then it got more fame and whatever you want to say here.
it did. I mean, fame
And of course, and it got it on the side of, we're looking for the downside of that, right? So
yeah. Well, and I think here's the big problem in my view is that anyone who, or a lot of people, if they would talk about race and justice like they probably had been the last 5 or 10 years or 20 years or 30 years,
right,
now they were getting labeled as critical race theorists
right.
when
So
when they had nothing to do with that.
that's right. That's my point. I've been trying to talk about these topics, but I don't know much about critical race theory.
Yeah. Well, and here's the thing. The question I think people need to ask in churches where people, if people are really concerned about it, is, well, tell me how your church has successfully helped people address race, and show me all the minorities at your church that say your church is their
Right. Well, we know that's not too good.
Helping them to flourish,
right?
And that they don't feel like that they've had to commit cultural suicide to be part of a majority white church,
right?
And so I don't see, a lot of the people that are criticizing critical race theory as being people who have these multi-ethnic churches that are great examples of how everybody's living well.
No, they're not coming from that point of view. They're probably coming from, more of a total whiteness view or something, where you're trying to, or a majority white church or something.
Yes,
maybe, and they're not addressing those issues, and they just don't want to touch those issues. And I mean, that's the way to get around it, by getting on critical race theory.
I think that's one of the ways, or by, it's just the latest way to call somebody a Marxist.
Marxist! I forgot about that one.
I mean, because are some people that actually are critical race theorists, are some of them Marxists? And
they might be, that's the problem with some of these things, that
not that necessarily means
that there's good points to it, but then the author might not be. It's just like you were talking a little about that one
about Kuiper, yeah, sure.
Yeah, same way. There's good points and bad points.
Yeah, and I think the bigger thing to me is, there is the opportunity amid a polarized society for Christians to be showing the way for us to live better together, and people getting rabid, if you will, about things like critical race theory is a reason. I mean, it's something that basically keeps people from moving into, the practice of a kind of Christian witness that would show people, hey, guess what? We can actually explain to you from our theology why it's not a surprise that humans do their worst sometimes, and including building systems. In fact, here's an interesting thing.
I think some Christians don't like to hear about a church being diverse or diversity.
I think that there are people who get nervous about that because they think it means a particular thing. And here's the problem with that, is that sometimes it does mean what they fear it means. And because justice, diversity, whatever kind of language we're using, none of that means that if I care about it, that I'm always doing it the right way, or that everybody.
Oh, right. No, I understand that we're not perfect on these things, right?
Yeah. But the problem is that if people only think that a bad version of something is the definitive version of something, then they're not necessarily doing the work to see that, well, is the problem that practitioner rather than the thing itself? Right. And I guess this is really important. the point, in my view, is not that even people need to be spending all that much time on critical race theory, right? I mean, there are people who are, I think, in the process of writing some helpful books about that. So Robert Chow Romero and Jeff Liu are doing that. My colleague Nathan Cartagena is doing that,
Uh-huh.
and so they are, and they're trying to help people just understand what it is.
Right.
And I guess here's I guess another part of it is, there's so much of, in our society in general, no matter what side people are on, so much of a tendency to want to quickly define what somebody is, that there is often
Oh,
a willful refusal to understand the complexity of things. In other words, I mean, it might be entirely possible. And by the way, critical race theory is not just one thing. I mean, the people who, it's really an ongoing academic conversation that's really in, it's like a secular, legal, academic conversation. There are Christians involved in that conversation, but it's basically a secular academic conversation. And anyone in the church who's thinking that people are turning to this as the only thing to help people think about race, is like, no, actually, they're not. In fact, and most people aren't, because most people aren't reading it because it's really dense. So whatever people think is going on, specifically to critical race theory, most people aren't doing it. But if you're accusing people of that and thinking that's what's happening, then you're getting in the way of trying to say, well, how do we actually tell the truth about what has happened in our past,
right.
going on in our present,
Right.
how we want to live toward a better future. And
Yeah.
it's it's
I
uh, it's it. We're not in a time where people are, I think, willing to go through all the twists and turns that are necessary if you're really going to say, okay, well, here's how this might be helpful. Here's where it's missing something. Here's where I may have a disagreement with it. All those
right.
types of things, because that's really what you need to do. It's no different, honestly, than if you're going to deal with a particular theological tradition. Let's say some people say, well, those Reformed people, those Arminian people, those Catholics, those Orthodox, or whatever. To me, the question is, well, what's the best face of those traditions?
Yeah.
What's the what are they most? In what ways are they most helpful? And in what way might they, not do certain things as well as some other traditions, and just admit it?
Yeah. Well, some of it is, maybe that terminology is just thrown out there, but some of it is just to look at our past and where we've been. And I think sometimes we're afraid of that. And
I think people
like
are.
I would use the example of the Southern Baptists. They might have some embarrassing, because where they've come from, their denomination,
Mhm.
and that could embarrass some, but it could, it could be a learning point. And a lot of them do know their history, but some maybe don't.
I don't think that it's as much about not wanting to look at the history as it is, um, a very narrow way of thinking about how we should talk about faith and race, in a way that I think winds up just not doing justice to the complexities we must address if you're going to be addressing race. Just like, let's just use a very contemporary example. There were certain arguments at the Supreme Court today about abortion
Right.
because of the law in Mississippi. Well, if you're going to really talk about dealing with abortion, you have to talk about, yes, the whole thing about viability of the child, life of the mother. I mean, are there exceptions? All those types of things. But you also have to talk about what's going on in terms of the conditions of life that people are in some of these situations, where there are people who feel like there's just no way I could have another child because of poverty, or maybe the person's about to go into rehab. I mean, who knows what it is? Okay, well, how obvious or how prominent are the things are in place for those people, such that if there's an unplanned pregnancy, there are people there who say, you know what, we are waiting to do whatever we can to care for the woman and to care for that child when it's born. If the woman wants to get a child for adoption, we will help that child be placed in a loving and supportive home.
Right.
And we will also try to help this woman to be in a
Right.
situation helping her to come to greater wholeness.
Yes.
And my point is that a lot of times I think the pro-life question that to people it's about whether or not you're saving the infant. Yes, save the infant, but the infant is carried by a woman. And now what about the life of that woman? And a lot of times the complexities of the life of that woman. And so, we have to do the whole life thing. And at this
Yeah,
point,
no, I agree with that.
I
Yeah.
think there's an organization. I think they're based out of Evanston called Pro Grace.
Okay.
I think they do a really good job of trying
Yeah.
to address this.
Well, I just think I'm surprised that there isn't a center movement to on that issue. Just discuss that briefly here about that pro-life people and the quote abortion side. I think we should get together. They should get together more because of our low birth rates in America, and should push our family leave, maybe even pay for pregnancies. I mean, there's other ways that this can be handled that I think could be agreeable to both sides. But it seems like I think the issue is made for politics
Well,
somewhat.
it is.
I think both sides want it on a. They don't want nothing in between here. They want to keep it going.
Well, that's possible, and I think in terms of you talking about the lower birth rates situation,
Right.
to me that's part of a larger cultural problem. I think
Well,
about
I don't know, but I'm just saying that should be part of the address here too.
yes, yes, I agree with that. Yes,
I don't know what all the reasons are, but
yeah,
that is a problem, and I'm not trying to say that there's other pro-life things that should be brought up, like
hmm
WIC and other things. Just,
yes, yes,
I mean, there's a lot of pro-life things, and of course, today I was hearing about a lot of people talking about guns the same way. You should be
hmm
pro-life about guns. Why do we have so many guns to kill people?
hmm
I go that could go that way too.
hmm
But I was just thinking about history here
hmm
and where you're at and
hmm
how we sometimes forget history. I was thinking about the Jewish history, 4,000 years, or I guess it is. How many years on the Passover? It's just like we're not forgetting that Passover. God doesn't want us to forget that,
hmm
and I think that's been used in history by a lot of people in sermons, and I think it's a good point about how we get out of Egypt and get going and what happened there. And it's history that we sometimes, I guess some people are the Holocaust one, and some people want to just marginalize that, or
hmm
we can think of other things. And I think Blanchard should be up higher up, though. I just think about the anti-slavery abolitionist movement there.
Well, I think, I mean, he's famous for being the founder of Wheaton College and being an abolitionist. Wheaton College was also a stop on the Underground Railroad. We have an obelisk in Blanchard Hall.
Oh, really?
That's an honor of that, yeah. And I think the the fact of Jonathan Blanchard being an abolitionist, it's part of our history.
Right.
Um,
It
but
didn't resolve everything, but it's a history. I
it is,
read how many black students came afterwards. Not too many,
uh,
but
yeah.
I guess it was try. It just didn't work as well for early black
Well, I mean,
students.
it was hard everywhere,
It'll
right?
be hard anyway, right?
Yeah, in the 19th century. But one of the things that's actually happening right now at Wheaton College is that we are there's a task force looking at the history of Wheaton College around questions of race in our history, going back from
Right.
the beginning to the year 2000. And so we're wanting to do a very serious understanding of that. And I think the important thing about any look back at history, right, is of course you're going to expect to find things that are disappointing. The
Right.
challenge is to neither be one of two mobs, right? A mob that says, because I discovered something terrible, therefore we must, do you change all?
Like getting rid of Lincoln
Yeah, or whatever, yeah, and the other side of it is the
or get
mob.
rid of Jefferson.
Or yes, or like a mob that the other mob would be the one that would say, um, why are you trying to erase history in a way by pretending that people who may have done important and helpful things, but also
Right.
had big failures, that you erase the helpful things they did by only wanting to sort of scrub them from any acknowledgement in the history of the
I
institution.
think Nixon is an example. Some people have, he's got some good points, and then we got,
Well, yeah, we have the inclination for recording people, for example.
what
Yeah,
was that?
the inclination for recording people,
Yeah.
all the tapes. I mean, apparently he was very paranoid. I guess it's really interesting because obviously he was a pretty good foreign policy president.
That's what I meant. He's good on that one side and then
Yeah,
this other side.
I mean, he was handed Vietnam, so I mean that was a difficult
But he
situation.
said it was going to get over faster, but it didn't. But
Yeah. Um, and then, but the other side of it is obviously he was,
right, he was definitely flawed, and he
yeah.
dragged down some of our evangelical friends like Billy Graham with him too. There, that Billy got
Well, he
really
dragged down a
associated.
lot of people.
Yeah, he dragged down some other people too. They got too close associated with him,
Yeah,
and
yeah. It's a sad thing because if you think about Nixon, because any accomplishments that he had
right,
get tainted by the fact that he's our only president to resign because he,
right. I mean, that's what history's probably going to look more in than about opening the door to China and that type thing.
right. The fact that hey,
Or,
what he did there was obviously very significant, but being paranoid
right.
and doing things out of that paranoia are more of what's going to happen.
You know, along telling the truth though, I maybe you've been out to the Nixon Library there in California, but that library's got those tapes. They don't fudge about Nixon, really. I mean, they put out the whole ball of wax. Of course,
Yeah,
they do show China quite a bit, but they do have the Nixon. But they do have the. I remember I had a picture like you had kind of a standby picture, like you're at the Wall of China with Nixon shaking hands. You know, I had to figure it was made for that, and I shook hands with Nixon. I remember I have a picture of that, but they did have the tapes there though. So
yeah.
they didn't hide that point, and then they talked about some of that stuff. So
And I think the thing about telling the truth about history is that the goal is not in telling the truth to then so complicate our history that we think, oh no, we're like the worst nation in the history of the world. I think it's instead dealing with the fact that a lot of people, and obviously some people losing their families, etc. They only want a version of history that is very light on the fact that there were any imperfections, and so people, I think when they're thinking about the United States, there's some people their thinking is, look, I don't want, I don't want our country to be hated by our children, etc. And so I understand people being concerned about that, but pretending that things didn't happen in your history is not the way to do it.
you know,
Especially when really the way you can do that is say, yes, there's a lot of things we did and a lot of mistakes that were made, like every other country. And and the thing about our country is that we have a set of aspirations that ought to be guiding us in this American experiment to try to do better and to learn from those things. And there are people, I think, right now who are fearful about the how the difficulties in American history somehow mean that people are going to now think that our country is terrible. It's like, no, it just means it's a complicated thing. And 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 yes, I mean, it's possible that some people, in their enthusiasm for digging up the bad stuff, may give the impression that, well, we were never that great anyway. It's like, okay, as long as you, in fact, I said this in a talk I gave a couple months ago. I said, if we step away from thinking that whatever that as a great nation, that also means that we are a righteous nation. If we step away from that idea that we have to be righteous, because no nation can live up to that we step away from that, then we're better able to say we're a nation that has aspirations, and there's a lot of things that remain aspirational, and that there are ways that we have failed to live up to that, but we want to keep moving toward that. And here are some of the ways that we failed, and here's some of the ways that we failed early on. And the thing is, of course, that race is only one of the ways that we that we failed on that,
Yeah.
right? I mean, there are foreign policy ways that we did that. Obviously, things around gender, things around economics. I mean, all kinds of stuff. And um, again, I guess the problem is that I'm talking here about dealing with a complex way of looking at history. And I think the thing we have to face, and this is not just the United States problem, is many people would just rather have a simple, nice history, almost like, a picture book, a kindergarten picture book version of what our history is, that says, and then and now here we are today, this great country that started out and has always wanted to be about liberty and freedom. And that's what we are, these United States. It's like, well, yeah, but for most of your, over half of your history, you've made some people not quite so free.
Yeah.
So,
I just thought of how we can sort of pull this together maybe here.
sure.
About history with Israel
Mm-hmm.
and the Old Testament, and
Mm-hmm.
how some of that was misused in the past for anti-Semitism, and
Sure.
how sometimes Christians don't know how to blend that branch together too
Right.
well,
Right.
because we got all this, the Jewish history was, they didn't follow God and this, and
Mm-hmm.
we can go down that list. And then we got the Holocaust after that, and a lot of other bad things happening, and Jewish people are somewhat maybe looked down on, that they're not
Mm-hmm.
with Christ. And how should we pull that together in a good Christian way with
Well,
our Jewish brothers and sisters?
I think one of the things to remember is that in terms of the larger narrative of Scripture, most Christians are Gentiles, which means we're grafted in.
That's correct.
So one of my colleagues, not here but another institution, Willie Jennings, talked about the fact that we had to remember that we are people that were on the margins who were brought into the story. And the point is to remember that we're grafted into Israel. This is Paul's point. When you're getting into Romans 10:11, his whole point was don't be snarky about the fact that you're grafted in, because people from the original olive tree are falling off, detaching themselves from the tree, so to speak. You're still grafted into it, and I think remembering that what God chose to do was to bring about the reconciliation of all things through making this nation Israel and having a Jewish Messiah. And so we have to be honest about that, while also recognizing that you have this double-pronged problem. One is that his own, he came to his own, but his own did not receive him. You can't pretend that didn't happen, or that a lot of people are not interested in receiving him, who are of that background. But the other side of it is just the fundamental truth that if you are a Christian and you are grafted into this, you're now part of this multi-ethnic people of God whose roots are Israeli roots. You have to, one, remember your roots, but two, also note that you were told by your boss, who's this Jewish Messiah, that you were to love your neighbor as yourself, which is everybody, which means that there's no warrant for taking actions that um, are denigrating people, or actions that you think give you an excuse for looking down on people. And I think it has to be, in practice, it has to be carefully negotiated, because there are obviously, I think, a lot of Jewish people that are not interested in Christianity. They're happy being Jewish,
Right.
and
Hmm.
they're still waiting for Messiah to come because they don't think that Jesus is the Messiah. And I think the thing we need to do is just maintain friendly relations with them,
Right.
as best we can. And also just remember that, no matter what tensions there may be, the burden is still to us to be the ones that love our neighbors as ourselves.
Yes.
And no matter, and somebody's dissonance with Jesus as Messiah is not an excuse for not treating them like a neighbor. The fact
Amen.
that they're a human being is sufficient
Amen.
for them being treated that way. And also, I think on the history part, by the way, the history of Israel shows us, prior to Jesus and Pentecost, what do humans do? Even when God is the one with whom they have a covenant relationship, people are just really good at going their own way and having great moments and then having really bad ones. And so it's not a surprise that people can have glory days and shame days, we might say. And um, it's really, I think, a cautionary tale for us to say that, look, the way that history works out is that it just tends to be a roller coaster. Things don't just go on a straight line to the promised land.
Yeah, and we have our Messiah who we celebrate his birthday coming up on
Yeah.
the 25th here, and remember he was in exile too, and
Yes. Yes. Yes.
and so many things that sometimes we forget. And
Right.
I thank you for sharing some of your points of view with me here.
Yes. My light just, you saw that? The light went. How
You
does
are the light, brother. You are the light.
that?
No, no, it's fine. So I just thank you for visiting with us this afternoon, and hope we
Good to
can
be with you.
share this around with some of these insights. And just remember our brother here and his teaching, and keep him in good health and through this pandemic, and just with the students there that he teaches. So I thank Dr. Bocate for being with me today. I just thank him very, very much. And
Talk.
and Friday we'll be hopefully back at 5. Don't know who my guest is yet, but we'll hopefully have a guest. Hopefully, or else we'll replay this beautiful tape. I think it was very beautiful. So I again thank you, Doctor, for being with me today and sharing. We have a little extended time here, but it was beautiful. And hope we'll see you soon again. Maybe not a year from now again, but
We'll do it in the middle of the
next
night
spring
Midwest.
here or something.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, we'll do something more. I got another professor promised me out at Fuller, Dr. Ra. He
Oh yeah.
said
I
he
know. I know.
he
Yeah.
said he'd come. Oh, we'll talk on a topic that's somewhat related.
Oh yes.
The topic of the oh, what am I thinking now? My mind just went blank.
Next evangelicalism. That one.
No, yeah, that's the book he wrote. But I'm thinking about he's got a comment on the oh the papal paper. What is it?
Oh, the doctrine of discovery.
Doctrine of Discovery. Yeah,
Yeah.
might talk about that a little.
Which is
But
only one of the documents that's like that. But
oh, really?
yeah.
But
Yeah.
anyway,
There
that plays
was
into
prior to
the
that, unfortunately.
that plays into some of this
Yeah.
stuff too, quite a bit.
Yeah.
Well, I just thank you. Have a good Christmas, Dr. Bocate, and God bless everybody out there. Again, thank you, Doctor. And we'll see you soon again. God bless. Bye-bye, everybody.
Take care.